There are warnings that go unheard, whispers lost in time, until suddenly they return, louder than ever, just when the world needs them most. In the quiet halls of a remote monastery in southern Italy, a man lived who bore the wounds of Christ. A man who spoke little, suffered much, and when he did speak, the heavens listened. His name was Padre Pio. To many, he was a mystery. To others, a miracle. To the world, a warning we ignored. You've probably heard stories about him, the man who could read hearts, appear in two places at once, and carried bleeding wounds on his hands and feet for 50 years. He lived in prayer, in pain, and in deep union with God. But there's something most people don't know. Padre Pio gave a specific warning about Russia. A spiritual insight so intense, so precise, that those who heard it couldn't forget it. But the world didn't listen. Today, decades later, that forgotten prophecy is starting to echo louder than ever. And for those with ears to hear, it may not be too late. Because what he saw wasn't just a political warning. It wasn't about nations and borders. It was about the soul of humanity and the darkness that rises when faith fades. This video is not just about history. It's not just about a country. It's about something deeper. A spiritual battle that's unfolding right now, all around us. In the next few minutes, we're going to uncover what Padre Pio really said, why he spoke about Russia, and how his words may be more relevant today than ever before. But I warn you, this isn't just another story. This is a message for those who are ready to see the signs. A call for those who still believe that heaven speaks and that we must respond. So take a deep breath, open your heart, because the truth you're about to hear may change the way you see the world. And once you hear what Padre Pio revealed, you'll never forget it. Long before anyone heard his name echo across the world, Padre Pio was simply Francesco Forgione, a humble boy from the Italian countryside. He wasn't born into wealth, power, or influence. But from a very early age, there was something different. He would speak of visions. He said he saw angels and demons. He would go into trances during prayer, sometimes for hours. And even as a child, he longed for the sacred, not play, not games, but God. By the time he was 15, he entered the Capuchin order and took the name Pio, and that's when the miracles began. He began to suffer strange physical pain during prayer. His health declined for no clear reason. He would spend nights fighting invisible forces that no one else could see, but everyone around him could feel. Then came the moment that changed everything. In 1918, while deep in prayer, Padre Pio received the stigmata, the same wounds that Christ bore on the cross. His hands, feet, and side bled continuously for 50 years. Doctors tried to explain it. Scientists examined it. None could understand it. He became a phenomenon, but not because he wanted attention. In fact, Padre Pio hated fame. He remained in a small monastery in San Giovanni Rotondo, rarely leaving, never seeking to be seen. And yet, thousands came to him. Because they said he knew their sins before they spoke. Because he could bilocate, be in two places at once. Because people said that just standing near him felt like standing near God. But for all his gifts, Padre Pio suffered. He was persecuted, even by members of the church. He was silenced for years. His masses were restricted. His confessions monitored. His writings censored. Yet he never complained. Never rebelled. He accepted everything in silence, offering it up for the salvation of souls. Why does this matter? Because when someone like Padre Pio speaks, when someone who suffers for the truth finally opens his mouth to warn the world, you pay attention. He didn't make political speeches. He wasn't involved in debates. But when he spoke about Russia, it wasn't speculation. It wasn't theory. It was prophecy. And if you ignore it, you do so at your own risk. It happened quietly. No crowds. No headlines. Just a few words, whispered by a man who bore the pain of Christ in his very flesh. Padre Pio wasn't known for making predictions. But when he did speak of the future, his voice carried the weight of heaven itself. And in one of those rare moments, when asked about the condition of the world and the dangers to come, he mentioned Russia. The moment is recorded through multiple witnesses. One of them asked Padre Pio what he feared most for the future of the church and the world. He closed his eyes for a moment. then said something that sent a chill through the room. Russia will spread her errors across the world. When you see her rise again, pray. Those in the room didn't fully understand. Some even thought he was referring to political ideologies, to communism, perhaps. But there was something deeper in his tone, a sadness, a knowing. Others have claimed he said more, that he warned of a spiritual darkness rising from east. Not just weapons, not just war, but a war of the soul. One that would take root quietly, through culture, belief, disconnection from God, until entire nations forgot how to pray. The prophecy was rarely spoken aloud after that. Some say the church preferred to keep it hidden, fearing panic or misunderstanding. Others believe it was simply ignored because it didn't seem urgent at the time. But Padre Pio wasn't speaking about politics. He was speaking about a spiritual infection, a coldness that would spread like frost, silent, invisible, deadly. There will come a day, he once said, when even the faithful will grow tired of prayer, and the enemy will take advantage of that silence. This was not a prediction. It was a warning. And now, as we look around the world, as we watch nations rise in pride and fall in faith, as we see conflict erupt where peace once lived, as we hear truth being traded for comfort, we have to ask, was this the moment Padre Pio was talking about? And if it is, what happens next? When Padre Pio said, Russia will spread her errors across the world, what exactly did he mean? Was he speaking about war? Communism? The Cold War tensions that gripped the 20th century? Or was there something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface? To understand his words, we must understand how mystics speak. They don't always name things directly. They speak in symbols and images given to them through divine illumination. So let's look closer. When he said errors, it's unlikely he meant only politics. He was speaking, as he always did, about spiritual errors, belief systems that turn hearts away from God, ideologies that deny the soul, movements that glorify materialism, power, and control, instead of humility, prayer, and surrender. Padre Pio lived through the rise of atheistic communism, where faith was outlawed, priests were imprisoned, churches were burned, and truth was silenced. He knew what that kind of darkness looked like. He saw it not just in news headlines, but in confessions of broken souls who came to him with hearts wounded by a world that no longer believed. And when he warned that those errors would spread, he didn't mean tanks. He meant ideas. Ideas that would quietly invade the West, through education, through media, through culture. Ideas that say, God is outdated, truth is whatever you want it to be, faith is weakness, the soul doesn't matter, you are your own God. These are the errors that Padre Pio saw rising from east, encircling the globe. And when he said, pray when you see her rise again, it wasn't just a call to say a few words before bed. It was a call to awaken, to drop to our knees, to fight not with anger, but with prayer, not with weapons, but with repentance. Because this war, the one he saw, wasn't for land. It was for souls. Your soul, mine, ours. So when you hear his words again, don't think of maps or flags. Think of your heart and ask yourself honestly, have these errors already crept into my own life? And am I fighting them or letting them win? Look around you. At first glance, it may seem like the world is just going through another cycle of tension, politics, economics, wars, uncertainty. But if you look deeper, if you silence the noise, you'll begin to see what Padre Pio saw decades ago. A silent shift, not just in nations, but in hearts. In the West, where churches once echoed with hymns, where families prayed together, where faith was lived daily, today there's emptiness. People no longer kneel. They scroll. They no longer confess. They justify. They no longer ask for grace. They demand rights. Truth has become opinion. Holiness has become intolerance, and the soul a forgotten whisper. Could this be what Padre Pio meant when he said, Russia will spread her errors? Not that Russia is the villain, but that the spirit of her past rejection of God, her errors of materialism, denial of the soul, glorification of the state over the spirit, would spread like smoke through invisible cracks, seeping into minds, media, classrooms, families. And now we see it. In the breakdown of moral clarity. In the confusion about identity, purpose, and truth. In the rise of despair, addiction, and spiritual apathy. In children growing up without ever hearing the name of God, except as a curse. And beyond the West, we see literal war. Russia at the center of global tension once again. The world watching nervously. Lines being drawn. Allies forming. And the question rising again. Is this the rise Padre Pio spoke of? Maybe. But whether or not you believe the geopolitical moment is connected to his prophecy, there's no denying that the spiritual signs are here. Because even if there's no war with weapons, there is already a war on the soul. And many are losing without even realizing it. But Padre Pio didn't share this warning to create fear. He shared it to wake us up, to call us back, to remind us that while darkness may rise, so can we. If we return to prayer, if we return to truth, if we return to God, not later, not when it's convenient, but now. Because heaven is not asking for our opinions. It's asking for our hearts. And in times like these, silence is no longer an option. Prophecies aren't given to scare us. They're given to prepare us. Padre Pio didn't share this vision because he wanted headlines or fame. He hated attention. He suffered in silence. He prayed in the shadows. But when heaven showed him what was coming, he spoke. And now that message echoes louder than ever. Not because of a war on the news, but because of the war happening in our hearts. The real danger isn't just what happens on the outside. It's what happens when we let go of the light inside. When we stop believing. When we stop praying. When we start thinking that holiness is outdated and sin is just self-expression. That's the darkness Padre Pio warned about. Not just bombs, but blindness. Not just conflict, but compromise. Not just the fall of nations, but the quiet collapse of the soul. And here's the truth. That collapse is already happening. Not out there, but in here. In the choices we make every day. In the way we treat others. In the way we ignore God when life gets too busy or too comfortable. But the most beautiful part of Padre Pio's message is that it's not too late. Not for you. Not for your family. Not for this world. Because in every prophecy, there is a choice. We can continue down the path of distraction, division, and spiritual numbness. Or we can choose to return. To silence. To humility. To truth. We can start praying again, not as a routine, but as a rescue. We can wake up before it's too late. Because the danger isn't that the world will fall apart. It's that we'll get so used to the darkness, we won't even notice it anymore. So take a moment right now. Ask yourself, am I awake? Or have I already fallen asleep in the middle of a spiritual war? If you feel something stirring in your soul, that's not coincidence. That's your spirit remembering who you are and who you belong to. Padre Pio's words were not the end. They were the beginning of a call, a divine alarm clock. And now that you've heard it, you can't unhear it. So, what will you do with it? If your heart felt something during this message, don't ignore it. We're not promised tomorrow. And the soul doesn't wait for the perfect moment to awaken. It responds when it hears truth. Maybe Padre Pio's warning reached you today for a reason. Maybe you weren't meant to scroll past this video. Maybe heaven wanted you to remember that even in the silence, you're being watched. You're being called. So now ask yourself, who else needs to hear this? Share this message. Not for views, not for numbers, but because someone out there is still asleep, and your share could be the bell that wakes them up. Leave a comment. Tell us how this message hit your heart. We read everyone, because here, we're not building an audience. We're building a family of souls that are tired of pretending everything's okay. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Beyond Yourself. Not for entertainment, but for alignment. Each video we create is a key, and one of them might open a door you've been afraid to walk through. This isn't about fear. It's about remembering. Remember who you are. Remember what matters. And remember this, Padre Pio's words weren't meant to echo in the past. They were meant for now. For you.